welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and I'm going to be giving you my understanding of what you guys were expecting me to give is sort of to walk through some of the material from some of my books, and particularly with an emphasis on free market economics and how, with that perspective, you can see that the standard way American history is taught leaves a lot to be desired. Okay, so that's what I thought my objective was to rely on some of the work, because I'm an economist, I'm not an historian, but I have done some work touching on history. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll pull up a PowerPoint and just go through that. I'll try to keep my remarks to maximum like 45 minutes and then turn it over to your guys' questions. Okay, so I'm titling this Seeing History Through the Lens of Economic Theory, a Free Market Perspective. And the two books that I'm going to be using for the slides I'm going to show you here in the material I've prepared, the one on the left here is Lessons for the Young Economist. That is it's literally a textbook that I wrote. I was commissioned by the Ludwig von Mises Institute, which is a free market educational institution in Alabama, and they wanted a book that was pre-college. Okay, that they said something that we could even give to junior high students, even to introduce them to sort of free market perspective and economics, but doesn't use a lot of intimidating vocabulary. And so that's what the purpose of this is. So even adults can read it. I mean, my parents took the course, the online course that I taught, using this as the text because they had never formally studied economics before. But it is written with an eye towards so the junior high students, or maybe freshman, sophomore in high school. That was the range I had in mind. And then on the right-hand side here, The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Great Depression and the New Deal. The title suggests what it is. It is a free market look at the 1920s stock market boom, and then, of course, the Great Crash, and then the things that happened under Herbert Hoover and FDR. So in terms of me giving revisionist history, if that's the phrase you want to use, the right-hand book, of course, that's the whole thing, whereas the left-hand book here is more of a textbook aimed at junior high students. But I do get into some historical lessons, even in the lessons, the left-hand book, talking about things like North Korea and just what happened under communism and various regimes. Stuff that may surprise a lot of you, even if you haven't looked into it. Just how many millions of people died when various governments fell to communist influence and so forth. That a lot of things. So when we're not talking about wars, we're talking about people dying from famine in their own countries that were engineered by the people who took over. That kind of stuff we don't normally hear. Everybody knows about the Holocaust, knows how many people the Nazi regime killed. It's not so often taught how many of their own people various communist regimes killed. Okay, so that's the part that's overtly historical in the left-hand book. All right, so for tonight, the two main things I thought I would talk about in the limited time we have are the government's role in terms of money, and then later we're going to just go through some myths of the Great Depression. So as far as government and money, one of the things I explain in the Lessons for the Young Economist is that historically, money didn't come from the government. It wasn't created by the state. All right? It's not that there was some wise king one day who woke up and his subjects weren't using money. They were all bartering. And he said, wow, I have a great idea. Why don't we all, instead of just trading chickens for cows and butter for shirts, why don't we all start using this other object, and anytime you want to sell something, you trade it for this thing, and then when you want to buy something, you use this thing. Like, let's grab these shells and we'll call it money. All right, that would be crazy, right? That's not the way it happened. Okay, just because people would have thought the king was nuts, he wouldn't have had that idea, because on the face of it, if you could forget for a minute how money works and how you use it, it's kind of a weird thing. It's saying that, you have something valuable you start out with, like if you're a butcher, you got a bunch of meat that people want to eat, and you want to trade it and get things for yourself. And so the most natural thing would be, well, gee, if I'm a butcher and I need my shoes to get fixed, I'll go find a cobbler who's hungry, and I'll trade him my meat for him repairing my shoes. That's the natural thing, but that's not what we do in a modern economy. What the butcher does is he goes and finds anybody who wants meat, who's hungry, and then he trades the meat for, in our case, green pieces of paper that are intrinsically useless. They have pictures of dead guys on them. And then you say, well, why would you do that? Why would you give up valuable meat for green pieces of paper? That's crazy. And he says, no, because I'm going to get some other sucker to do the same thing. The cobbler who can fix my shoes, he'll take these green pieces of paper too. And if we all could just agree to do that, then it works. All right? So it's a really weird arrangement, how money works. And so in the book, I go through historically how it could emerge step by step from barter, where people weren't using money, they were just directly trading goods against each other, and then just a natural evolution of how money would emerge spontaneously. Okay, we don't really have time to get into that tonight, but that's one part of the story. And so then historically, governments just came in and co-opted it, right? So money emerged from the marketplace through voluntary transactions, just sort of spontaneously. Nobody designed money; it just sort of emerged as a byproduct of people trying to better their positions by trading with each other. And then governments came along and wanted a piece of the action, and they started coming in and debasing the coinage and things like that. All right, so for our purposes tonight, let me just make a few points on this subject, and we'll move on to the Great Depression. So one thing that a lot of people don't realize is the very word inflation, its definition has changed. And that's why I'm calling it the old switcheroo, because it used to be that, in the 1800s, and I think even in the early 1900s, when economists or financial people, writing for major newspapers and so forth, when they used the word inflation, they meant monetary inflation. They meant an inflating of the money supply or the credit supply. That's what inflation was to them. Whereas in our day, of course, when people talk about inflation, they mean price inflation. And I don't know if you can see it, this cartoon. It shows a guy filling up at the gas tank, and there's a banker next to him that says crisis loans. Right? So just the point being that the gas is really expensive. Okay, so nowadays when we talk about inflation, we generally, the man on the street means prices are rising. Okay, so that the very terminology has morphed over the 20th century, where what we mean by the term inflation has changed. And as far as, what's the big deal? Well, I think it is significant, because back when inflation referred to the process of expanding the supply of money or the supply of bank credit, well, it was pretty obvious who was doing that, right? It was either the bankers back before there was a central bank, or now that there's a Federal Reserve in the United States, it's clearly the Fed is the one that is, if you're going to blame any institution for why is the money supply growing year after year, well, it's because that's the policies that the Federal Reserve have implemented. And so, but instead, by focusing on rising prices, it's like we're looking now at the symptoms and not at the cause. If you understand in terms of economics that why is it that prices rise year after year after year, well, it's because the quantity of money rises year after year after year, right? They just keep dumping more and more dollars into the system, so it's not surprising that every year, on average, the price of everything else in terms of dollars keeps going up. Okay, so a lot of free market economists are very cynical, and they deplore this terminological shift, because they say back in the day, you could put your finger on who was to blame for rising prices. So, of course, the two types of inflation, monetary and price inflation, go hand in hand. But the point is, by the terms centering attention on who's doing it, it's harder to escape the blame. Whereas if you think, if the very concept of inflation now means rising prices, well, then that could be anybody. In the 70s, it was easy to blame Arab nations because they were withholding the supply of oil, and so the price inflation of the 70s was, it's the fault of OPEC, or it's the fault of those greedy labor unions, or it's the fault of the greedy businesses, right? And it was harder to see the really what was going on. The reason year after year is because the institution that controls how many dollar bills there are kept flooding the market with more dollar bills.